Hello, and welcome back to Discover Stories on Reimagine Radio. I'm Sarah Smith, your host of the podcast and a student intern at the Vancouver Adapted Music Society. Today joining me is Jessica Kruger, also known as the Stubborn Baker. Jessica runs an independent business making custom cakes, cupcakes, and cookies, and also plays wheelchair rugby, among other sports. Just before jumping into our conversation today, though, it's important to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are fortunate to host this podcast. This is the unceded and ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and has been stewarded by them since time immemorial. Vancouver is located on territory that was never ceded or given up to the Crown by these peoples. The term unceded acknowledges the dispossession of the land and the inherent rights that Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh hold to the territory. The term serves as a reminder that these peoples have never left their territories and they will always retain their jurisdiction and relationships with the land. Jessica, welcome to Discover Stories.
Thank you.
I'm happy to have you here. Oh, yeah. So why don't we just dive right in, and maybe if you want to sort of introduce yourself and tell us your story.
Sure. Could be a long story, but we'll see how we go. So as you already know, I'm Jessica. I am a full-time baker. I own my own custom dessert business called The Stubborn Baker. So that's what keeps me busy these days. When I'm not baking, I play wheelchair rugby for the BC provincial team, spend time with my husband, my dog Molly, friends. Excited to get back up on the hill and do some sit skiing this year. So yeah, those are kind of the things that occupy my days lately.
Awesome. Sounds very fun, like a good range of hobbies.
Yes. Yeah. I guess I should say that I'm in a wheelchair as well. I said I play wheelchair rugby, but that's maybe a little bit out of context. I'm a quadriplegic, so I use a chair in my daily life. I had an accident when I was 15 that put me in a chair. So yeah.
Okay.
Throw that in there too.
Yeah. And so you use the term quadriplegic. We know you're a baker, and I think sometimes there's a lot of misconceptions about what quadriplegic actually means, because I can imagine people see your cakes and go, wow, that's amazing, but how does she do it? So can you maybe talk a little bit about what that actually means and if there's some common misconceptions or myths about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think most people, when they hear quadriplegic, assume that it means you don't have any function in your arms or in your upper body, whereas quadriplegic is actually just impairment to all four limbs. So for me, it means that I don't have like full flexion in my one hand, but I'm still able to, grip things. So I can hold a whisk and a piping bag and all the things I need to do for work. And then in my other side, it's like my better side, but I still don't have full tricep function. So I'm able to use my upper limbs, but they have some forms of impairment, and that's why I'm technically classified as a quadriplegic, and also based on like where you damaged your spine.
Okay, gotcha. So that makes sense. So it's essentially just some level of impairment in all four limbs to varying degrees, obviously.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, for some people, it does mean they have no movement at all in their upper body. And then there's people like me that you might look at as more of a paraplegic, but technically still a quad.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I think sometimes terms like that sort of people can throw them around not necessarily accurately. And that's such a broad range too of disability as well. Like those are two very different ways to live, I would imagine.
Totally. Yeah. It's one word to describe a whole range of capabilities within it. So I have people challenging me on whether I'm a quad or not. Sometimes like, you're not a quadriplegic. It's like, I think I know.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for that clarification. That's really helpful because I think that is something that commonly people aren't necessarily aware of.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Okay, so I'm wondering, you spoke about some of your hobbies, sit skiing, very cool, wheelchair rugby. Were sports like that something you were interested in before your accident, or did you sort of have to adjust your hobbies afterwards?
Yeah, not specifically rugby beforehand, but I was definitely into sports. I did basketball, softball, volleyball, cheerleading, a little bit of everything as a teenager. So when I had the accident, I definitely felt like I was going to lose the ability to play sports. I didn't really know about all of the adapted sports that are out there. So yeah, I was quick to find wheelchair rugby and fell in love with it right away. And then slowly have gotten better and better at the sit skiing. Sit skiing is I'd skied before, so I think the transition of like starting a sport that you did previously as an adapted version is a harder transition than a whole new sport because you have in your mind how it's supposed to be. So with skiing, I was a little more resistant to trying it in the beginning because I just felt like it wasn't going to be the same thing. But now that I'm at the point where I have like a little bit of independence with it, it's pretty awesome. It's hard to feel that free being somebody in a wheelchair in any other place. So on the hill is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's cool. That sounds really special. And I like that you commented sort of on doing the same sports that you'd done in the adapted way,
Hmm.
and sort of having those expectations about what skiing looked like for you before versus how it is now, and still being equally fun and freeing and adventurous.
Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very
A
cool.
few more falls, a few more falls and rolling down the hill these days, but it's part of the sport.
Yeah, part of the learning curve. It comes, I mean, as a new skier, non adapted, I think that's part of the territory, anyways.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Were there any other hobbies that you managed to sort of maintain with the adapted versions after your accident?
Yeah. Like in terms of sports, kayaking was something I did before the accident and something that I can still do now that I like. Um, I didn't really play tennis before, but play tennis occasionally now. It's like one of the sports that you can play with an able-bodied friend as like an adapted version as well. So I like that aspect of it. And then like outside of the sports world, baking was something that I did before I had my accident, and then something I really leaned into after the accident to sort of fill some of the gaps that I had lost in some of the hobbies I couldn't do anymore. I got into like the decorating side of things after the accident and started taking classes for that as well. So yeah, I feel like for the most part, there's a version of everything that I did before that I can do in an adapted way now. Just maybe some I'm not as excited about anymore.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think there's a lot out there that isn't made aware of a lot of the time in terms of adapted sports and hobbies and art. Like any hobby really that folks do can be adapted in most often, I think, can be adapted. So that's
Totally.
cool. It just is a matter of finding out what that looks like and how to access that.
Yeah,
Really cool.
exactly.
And I do want to get a bit more into the baking in a moment, but first, can we talk a little bit about the wheelchair rugby team? You mentioned you're on the provincial team, which is very cool and impressive. For listeners who don't know, I recently learned that wheelchair rugby is also referred to as murder ball because it's so intense. So, can you maybe
Yeah,
tell us a bit about what that's like?
for sure. Yeah, so it was originally called murder ball, just because it's like a full contact sport. We're in chairs that are built reinforced with metal so they can be smashed into each other. People are getting flipped over in their chairs. Like it's it definitely has the contact aspect of able-bodied rugby. But as it became like a Paralympic sport over the years, it wasn't the most marketable name. So they they switched from wheelchair or from murder ball to wheelchair rugby. And it honestly doesn't have that many similarities with able bodied rugby aside from the contact. So it can be a little bit confusing. It's played on a basketball court, and basically you just have to have possession of the ball and cross to the other end and score between two cones to get a point. And then on defense, you're, using your chair with contact to stop the other team from doing that. So yeah, it's a pretty fun game. It's a
Yeah.
co-ed sport. So when I started, I was one of two girls. I was 15 and like the next youngest person was in their 30s. So it was definitely a bit overwhelming to step into, but the community is incredible and it's been a really good addition to my life.
Wow. That sounds really intense and also really fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, yeah, especially being like a young girl at 15 and going in and with, I'm assuming you said there's two other, or sorry, there was one other female on the team at the time. How big is the team?
Yeah, typically we have between like 12 and 18 people that play for the team, I would say. So there's not very many women that play in the world. Over the last like 5 years, there's been some growth in the female department. I'm going to an all women's tournament in Paris this year. So that's the first time I've ever competed with like an all female team. So that's exciting. Um, but yeah, just in general, it's a pretty male dominated sport. So that adds a layer of interest to the whole deal.
Yeah, very intense, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think they took it easy on me in the beginning when I was 15, but now they're over it. They're not giving me any grace.
They're taking you very seriously now.
Yeah, which is good. That's what I want.
Wow, that's awesome. Very impressive also going to Paris for an all-female tournament. Amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, that's super exciting. Is that in 2023?
Yeah,
Nice.
in March. Coming up pretty quick here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
So
congratulations.
Canada's putting together like a team basically that they'll be sending of all girls.
Cool. So a national team now, kind of.
I mean, technically yes, but not really. Like I shouldn't get the I shouldn't get the title of being a national player. It's just it happens to be women from all over Canada that will be representing the Canadian.
Very cool.
I don't want to give myself too much credit. Right?
I mean, it sounds to me like you deserve it, and that's a really cool thing to do. We'll have to keep an eye out on that and see how you fare over there.
Yeah, we honestly don't know what to expect either because you don't see all female teams competing ever. So we don't even know what the other countries are going to be bringing to the table. But hopefully, will be some strong competition for them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. Sounds like a really cool experience.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
I'm excited.